Now, secondly, when we analyze these rifles in terms of magazine capacity, both the Mosin Nagant and the Kar 98 have a equivalent magazine capacity of 5 rounds. The bolt on the Mosin Nagant, however, is highly complicated, and the bolt on the Kar 98 is a lot more of a simpler design. For example, if I set the microphone down here just a second so I can demonstrate this. In removing the magazine, in removing the bolt, sorry you can't see that because the camera is not pivoted. In removing the bolt on the Mosin Nagant, you have to flip it up, back it off, pull the trigger, and pull the bolt out. And if you look at the individual bolt here on the Mosin Nagant, there's many different interlocking parts, and it is rather difficult for someone who is not familiar with the disassembly of the M91 bolt mechanism to put it back together again if it somehow becomes dislodged or disassembled accidentally. And this would be a liability to the Russian infantrymen in World War II. Hopefully they would have been trained in, they would have been trained in that, but it still is a liability because Kar 98 has a much simpler bolt design. The process of actually taking out the bolt is about the same. I think there's not a drawback in the Mosin Nagant's in the method of disassembling the Mosin Nagant's bolt. When I take apart the Kar 98 bolt here, there's a sliding mechanism on the left-hand side, as you can see here. You have to pull that out to the left and then pull the entire bolt out to the back. And when you look at the Kar 98 bolt, it is a much simpler bolt. Much simpler bolt overall than the Mosin Nagant. There's not a whole heck of a lot to go wrong here, and according to Murphy's Law, if it can go wrong, it will go wrong. So I think that the bolt mechanism on the Mosin Nagant, while not affecting the bullet trajectory or the bullet dynamics or the ballistics of the round, will affect the maintenance of the Mosin Nagant, making it more complicated for the average soldier to maintain their for the Russian infantrymen to maintain their bolt mechanism on their Mosin Nagant. And so, in setting this Kar 98 back down and pivoting the camera, just take a second. We're going to address the optics now. Now I know that neither one of these rifles have optics attached to them, and that isn't as a result of my wishes, because if it were up to me, I would have a PU scope on this Mosin Nagant model M91. But the fact of the matter is that the PU scope costs several $100s and the rifle costs $89. Kind of deters me from getting the PU scope for the Russian Mosin Nagant. So that aside, in terms of the scopes which were commonly available to the Russian infantrymen and the German infantrymen for their rifles, for both the Mosin Nagant, either the M44, the snipers preferred the M91, like Vasily Zaitsev during the fight for Stalingrad and that infamous legendary battle. This was the weapon he used, the M91. And they typically mounted, at least according to my research, they typically mounted a 4 times PE or PU, or actually 4 to 3.5 times PU scope, which was a copy of the German Zeiss telescope, but it was much smaller and was much smaller in diameter than the German Zeiss 6x scope. The scope that the Germans use looked like a lot more like a hunter scope, or a lot fatter, a lot easier to identify targets in, and it afforded German snipers much easier target acquisition and had a much higher optical magnification, if you can put it that way. It had a much higher optical magnification than the PU and the PE scopes, which was due to the fact that the Soviets were thinking more about quantity than quality, and the Germans were renowned for their prowess in developing optics during World War II, and before that. I mean, the German optics, even in the submarines, were superior or superb to even some of the things that the Americans or the British had. But the Germans even developed, if memory serves me correctly, on the Sturmgewehr Model 44, the world's first true assault rifle, they had developed a scope attachment for their Sturmgewehr STG-44, which was a early, almost infrared scope, which was absolutely amazing and far ahead of its time, probably about 20 years ahead of its time. But that aside, I'm digressing a little bit here. The Kar 98 has a, if I set this down, the Kar 98 had a much higher quality scope that was commonly available to snipers, which allowed easier target acquisition and afforded the average German infantryman, or excuse me, not the average German infantryman, the average German sniper, like I said, greater target acquisition and greater magnification and greater quality in scopes. So the Kar 98, while I don't have examples here, I thought I'd touch on the optics because it's so important for the snipers. The scopes are of a much higher quality in the German models, in the German Kar 98.
This is a picture of Matthaus Hetzenauer. He served with the 3rd Gebirgsjäger Division on the Eastern Front, and he's credited with killing 345 Soviets with the 3rd Mountain Division with this Kar 98 with the Zeiss scope that I was talking about, and his longest kill was at 1100 meters.
And one of the most important factors, much more important than the optics even, would be the ammunition type. Like I said, the Mosin Nagant ran off of a 7.62 by 54 type of ammunition, about 180 grain. I actually shoot 204 grain bullets, Brown Bear, which is Russian surplus ammunition out of it. But I think, I'm not sure. I think they shot more like 180 grain back in World War II in the Mosin Nagant. They shot, I'm for sure though that they shot a 7.62 by 54, and the Kar 98 ran off of a 7.92 by 57 8mm Mauser. And the difference in caliber between both of these, the Russian had approximately a 3.11 diameter caliber in its weapon, and the Mosin Nagant had a .311 caliber, and the Kar 98 had a .323 caliber, .32, so it had a slightly larger bore, in the range of about 1/100th of an inch larger on the Kar 98 as opposed to the Mosin Nagant. So there was a bigger bullet coming at you slightly.